Hello, brethren, and maybe I didn't see everyone first time when I said a few words during the testimony. So yeah, that's right. The God's love is everywhere, and we're all talking from the Bible and in truth. And there's it shows in every aspect of the God's existence and in our life. So from the study in truth, we have seen that God's work toward man and fallen angels are sevenfold: creative, providential, redemptive, instructional, justifying, sanctifying, and delivering. In this discourse, the word providence not going to be used in the sense of the lower primary grace, whereby one gains and retains the means of supplying the needs of himself, his dependent, and the poor. Nor in the sense of God himself, because the word providence of God, it has a lot of meaning in the Bible. Nor in the sense of an exemplary manifestation of God's delivering or punishing power, having brought them into power, but in the sense of his watch care for his creatures, having brought them into existence, as we can read in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28 verses. I'm not going to read all of this. We have already read some of those. Then he cares for them by helping them in every needed way. And these are the last two verses, 29 actually and 30. I'm gonna read. And God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of the whole earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed, to you, and it shall be for a meat. And to every beast on the earth, and to every fowl in the air, and to everything that creeping upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat, as it was so." You see that God loves us not only in a word, just saying and expressing his feeling, but he's take care of all of his creation. There are some who are deists, admit that God created the universe and everything in it, but deny that he does anything further for his creation. They think that he is like a watchmaker of any other manufacturer who, after he has made and sell his article to people of a distant foreign country, lets them go without giving them further attention. Thus they say that having called inanimate and animate creation into existence and put them under the forces and the laws underlying and environing their several beings, he dismissed them to go on their way without any further attention and care for him. That's erroneous view. Such erroneous view exists. Therefore, the word providence has no real place in their thoughts and words. They would, if they could, delete it from our dictionaries in the sense of God's ordinary and extraordinary care for his creatures and of God himself. But we all experience the God's providence. In this discourse, I want to bring to your attention the 7 elements of God's providential acts. So first, going to be arranging for the supply of and actually supplying the need of his creatures. Second, preserving them. Third, directing their course. Fourth, overruling their untoward experiences for good. Fifth, restraining them from calamities and injury. Sixth, disciplining the world and his people. And 7, punishing them. I don't know if time will allow me to go through all of these 7, but probably I will ask our chairman to stop me at the needed moment. So that every child of God, both from scriptures and from experience, know that there is such an activity as providence on God's part. Therefore, he does not regard deistical denial of it as of any consequence. He can but pity the deist for the great poverty of mind and heart that comes to him from his unbelief on his subject. For the child of God knows that he is a subject of all elements of God's providence. He knows that God arranges for the supply of his creatures' needs and see to it that their needs are supplied. He can point out how the blessed teaches this by direct doctrinal instructions, as well as by examples, such as making the Garden of Eden for Adam and Eve, and supplying all their needs. That's what we just read in Genesis. Of food and shelter thereby, doing similar things throughout the ark for Noah and his family. Preparing Canaan for Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Israel, and through it supplying their need for food, raiment, and shelter throughout their generations. During the Jewish age, doing the same for Jesus and apostles and the other brethren throughout the gospel age. In our times, the Lord's people have experienced the same, as all them can testify. Such provision has not only satisfied their secular needs, but has also satisfied their religious needs through God's giving them the bread and water of life. In Matthew 4, verse 4 says, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeded out of the mouth of God." He also clothing them with the robe of Christ's righteousness and the garments of salvation. We can read it in Isaiah 61:10. And giving them proper shelter. God's arranging for the supply of their needs and give it to them is implies in the root meaning of the word providence, which is derived from the Latin word providere. It means to see before and to prepare and give help. But there are other acts that God's arranging for the supply of and bestowing such supply for the needs of his creatures. A second feature of his providence is God's preserving them. This he does first by shielding them from evils that are too strong for them. Thus, he allows no calamities or temptations that are too strong for them to bear, which come to them. Bible illustration of this can be found in the case of Abraham, in his dealing with Sarah, Isaac, and Lot, of Joseph and his experiences with his brethren, with Potiphar, and with Potiphar's wife and his jailers, of Moses in his deliverance and leading of Israel, of Gideon, of David, Hezekiah, and Josiah in their wars, of Jeremiah, Jesus, and innumerable other cases during the gospel age, especially during the Parousia and Epiphany. Providentially, God acts as preserver in a second way. He delivers his people amid evils that they are able to bear by strengthening them to overcome amid them. Thus, he allows such calamity and temptations as they are able by his help to bear profitably and victoriously to come to them. He delivering power therein is not a thing of irresistible grace, but is one that respects their freedom. Freedom of will and supplementing their strength, which gives them victory. Bible examples of such preservation can be seen in Samson's deliverance from Philistines, David's deliverance from Saul, those of the 3 Hebrew youths in the fiery furnace, Daniel's in the lion's den, Jesus' victories in his temptations and calamities, Peter's and Paul's deliverance from their enemies, and Stephen's victory and martyrdom, as well as victories of the faithful in their trials throughout the gospel age. All of us can recount God's acts of preserving us amid calamities and temptations in helping our weaknesses by his grace. A third way in which God acts providentially is directing the course of his creatures. This is true in general way as respects the race under the curse. For he puts meats and bones to its experiences, so that they are kept within the sphere marked out for them in his plan. Accordingly, he does not allow Satan or others' machinations to go beyond the limits of what plan marks out for them within the sphere of the course. Secular history proves such limits to be placed upon the activity of devils and wicked men in their designs on the race in general. Satan has become so angry with certain people who have stood in the way of his purposes that while he was within the limit of the course, allowed no injure them. He has not been permitted to blot them out, though attempting to do this in some cases. This is manifest in the experience of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, and all of those empires. Even when he was permitted to blot out certain governments, he was restrained from annihilating the peoples who under change of names and amalgamation have existed as part of other nations. As can be seen in the case of Heruli, the Ostrogoths, the Goths, the Vandals, and Longobards. All of these happened actually during the medieval history. Great conquerors like Nebuchadnezzar, Xerxes, Alexander, Caesar, Chamberlain, Genghis Khan, Tamerlane, and Napoleon sought to destroy peoples, but though working great havoc, they failed because said to them providentially, so far and no farther. We may even remember from recent history such cases like Hitler during the World War II, like Stalin was such a dictator who wanted to destroy all those small nations in his own empire. But they were stopped. And we may be sure that this will be proved true of Putin as well. But God especially directs the course of his own people, both collectively and individually. He has mapped out the general course of fleshly and spiritual Israel, as this is manifest by the Bible's teachings in the separate passages. By the 2,520 years parallels, by the dispensations parallels, by the harvest parallels, by the gospel age and its three miniature, and by the parousia and epiphany parallels. Bible examples exhibit this, as it's shown by the case of Abraham and Sarah in Egypt, and Egypt and Philistia, actually. Lot at Sodom's destruction, Hagar when she was cast out, Joseph in Egypt, Moses and Jesus in their infancy, Israel's preservation amid the Egyptian plagues, in the wilderness and in Canaan, at its conquest and deliverance through the judges. Saul, David, and Hezekiah, and the cases of Jeremiah and Barak, Jonah, Paul, Silas, and Peter. Church history is replete with God's directing the course of his faithful. This can be seen in the lives of the star members, particularly in the lives of their principal men, as well as in the lives of their special helpers. The parousia and epiphany furnish us many examples of God's guiding and directing the affairs of his people. So is in the 5 calls and 6 siftings, and in their leaders as well as in their individual lives. We should note God's prenatal care over Jesus, Paul, and the parousia epiphany messengers, and the pre-star membership's experiences of other servants of God, such as God's shielding for the youthful Luther from the lightning stroke that killed his youthful companion at his side. He's rescuing the child John Wesley through the human ladder from his burning home, from which no other way of escape was open, and delivering John Wesley from the mighty Inquisition. While not a star member, Samuel Crowthers is a remarkable example. Sorry. Born as a black boy early in the 19th century in an African tribe, he was in one of the frequent tribal wars. then was captured by one of the marauders, first sold for a horse, then for a bale of tobacco, and finally to a Portuguese slave dealer for a barrel of rum. He underwent all the horrors of the chained slave on a long jungle journey to the coast, and of life in a sheepfold packed into suffocation with other slaves, and finally was brought free to England after his Portuguese slave ship was captured by a British woman, a man of war. In England, he became a Christian in the home of his adopted father, was educated in secular subjects, and was then trained for a missionary work in Africa, where he was sent and became instrumental in the converting many thousand of his natives. And God works all things for our good. There is a fourth form that God's providences take us to the world and his people. He overrules untoward experience to their ultimate good. This can be seen in his manipulating the experience with evil to the world's good. It can also be seen in God's working good to his people out of their untoward experiences. Thus, God made the hardship of Jacob's, Joseph's, Moses, Joshua, Samson's, Jephthah's, Samuel's, David's, Hezekiah, Jeremiah's, Daniel's, Jesus, Peter's and Paul's lives work for their and God's people good. The persecution of Arius, Claudius of Turin, Berengar of Tours, Abelard, Arnold of Brescia, and Waldo made them nobler character and better witnesses for the truth. Wessel's conflict for the word, Savonarola's resistance to the wicked Pope, Alexander VI, Luther's agonies over Romish work righteousness, Hubmeier's tortures for the truth's sake, Granmer's weakness in prison, Servetus' trial and execution, Brown's imprisonment for the truth's sake, Wesley endurance of sectarian persecution and domestic infelicities for the truth's sake, Thomas Campbell's ostracism for the Lord's sakes, Miller's mockeries for his truth work, and Russell's slanders because of his devotion to the Lord, truth, and the brethren, have won and all directed to their development and the blessing of God's people through God's overruling untoward experience for good. This same principle is seen operating in the lives of the least and weakest of God's people also. I don't know, brother, if I have time to go any further, because my time is almost up. Okay.
I was saying that maybe a couple of minutes to finish up. Is that okay?
Yeah, okay, give me like four more minutes or something. God's providential acts have a fifth feature. He restrained his people from evil and from unprofitable deeds, and that by the circumstances that he brings into their lives. It's well described in Acts chapter 8. When the brethren selfishly clung to the pleasant association at Jerusalem, God removed former hindrances from their enemies, which act permitted persecution to bear its bloody arm. But this resulted under the God's working in those scattered abroad, finding new and fruitful fields of service. The controversy over the obligatoriness of the law made it hard for the brethren, particularly for the Paul and Barnabas. But the restraint that imposed upon them resulted under divine manipulation in clarifying the permitted truth and in knitting the resultantly joyful heart of the Jewish and Gentile brethren more closely together. God restrained Paul from preaching in unpromising Asia, which is mentioned as Minor, and Bithynia, and opened the way for him, thereby to begin a very fruitful mission ministry in Greece. Paul's thorn in the flesh, perhaps for eyesight, was a restraint put upon him to keep him from pride. As his persecution, necessity, in infirmity, and distresses for Christ's sake were overruled for good. This is also manifest in his capture in Jerusalem and in the restraint that was imposed upon him during his 5 years as a prisoner, which kept him from fruitless labors elsewhere and directed to his becoming fruitful in a literary way for all succeeding generation of the church. For during this period, the epistle to the Romans, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, for Timothy, Titus, and Philemon were written, and study were made that resulted in his written Hebrews, the greatest book of the Bible. The restraint imposed upon Peter for his denial of the Lord and acting with this dissimulation at Antioch kept him humble. And this same principle we see in other, like Joseph, Moses, in his 40 years in Midian, the Jews during their captivity, the brethren during the Dark Ages, particularly Berengar and Abelard, Cranmer, Hobmeyer, and Servetus. Doubtless, all of us can testify to such providential restraint in our life. And there's